Hey, welcome back to another night of Cybersecurity Awareness Month content. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about dealing with vulnerabilities. A few videos back, we talked about the vulnerability management kind of process and what that sort of looked like, what it was. Today, I want to talk about what you do once you know you have vulnerabilities in your environment. As organizations get larger, it gets harder and harder to just patch stuff, right? Like in an ideal world, you'd be able to say, okay, here's the vulnerability list, select all, install updates, and the list gets cleared kind of immediately. But in a lot of organizations, we're dealing with things like vendor dependencies, where the vulnerability is in an application that a vendor managed app relies on, or it's a system that is scheduled to be updated but has a very large cost to update, so it can't be done right now. There's all kinds of scenarios where we just fall into these specific situations where patching maybe isn't the only option that we need to look at. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do. Now, it's important to realize that we have options, right? Like there's a handful of things we can do. We can decommission systems, we can uh, ch- patch the software, change configs, we can upgrade systems, we can look for compensated controls. So let's spend a little time kind of going through each one of these and talking about what they mean and how they can help you. So first and foremost, I tell people to kind of look at, do you actually need the system that's impacted? Now, this seems obvious, but as organizations get really large, especially organizations that are focused on new features and adding new infrastructure and making new products go live, it's very easy for them to fall a little behind and forget about a legacy system that maybe did get migrated off of, or maybe there was a project to replace it and like 95% of the reliance on that system was gone, but then something else became more important, so we started to forget about it, and now it only does like 5% of what it used to, and it can actually be migrated and decommissioned. So the first step, do we actually need the system? You'll be surprised at how often we find things we can just turn off. And really, that's the easiest possible solution, right? Is, hey, we don't actually need this anymore. It was decommissioned. We forgot to shut it down. Or, hey, it is still doing this one thing, but that's pretty easy to migrate. So let's just migrate that and we're done with it. Or, it fell off the kind of radar because something was reliant on it, but that's also been decommissioned and we forgot to just circle back. So evaluate if the system can be decommissioned. If it can, turn it off and walk away. You're done. That's great. Now, if the system is still needed and can't be decommissioned, usually you do need to start looking at things like upgrading and patching. This could be an operating system upgrade. It could be a core application like SQL or something like that that needs to be updated. It could also be something small like a third party web server that's running as part of a larger application, something like Apache or IIS or something like that that's on the system because something else running on it needs it. Um, but the key is to really figure out if you can update those components, what that update looks like, what the implication of that update is, what might break and needs to be tested. But looking to see if you can just bring those up to date, usually the best course of action. Sometimes this means you need to reach out to a vendor because you might, it could be an appliance on your network and the vendor is running the old version of Apache, or it could be an embedded application that you can't really update on your own. You have to bring up a whole version of the application and then update a database or something like that. So, work with your internal IT department if you have one. If that's you, work with your vendors, figure out what can be updated, what kind of patching can happen, come up with a plan because this is going to happen more than once, obviously. So work out a process for these situations and then action those. Sometimes we get lucky and it's not even an update that needs to happen, but a configuration change. So we might run a scan that says, hey, there's some flaws with the algorithm used for this encryption. So you need to turn off older algorithms and use newer encryption methodologies only. It might be that remote access is turned on to a bunch of workstations that you don't need remote access turned on. So you can just go and turn that off. When you start seeing things like this, think through if there's a way you can automate some of this. So going forward, new things are rolled out with the appropriate settings. This is where tooling like group policy comes in really handy, or just a good set of configuration scripts or utilizing standardization tools like Terraform or things like that, where you're pushing out new instances of the same stuff, but with the proper configuration. The worst thing you want to do is go through and fix a bunch of stuff, but not change the underlying deploy methodology or rules, and then just start redeploying new things with the same vulnerabilities and flaws. It creates like this endless cycle of work. So when you're looking at things that require configuration updates, make sure you're updating internal standards to reflect that minimum of security that you're willing to allow going forward. That way, people know, hey, you have to turn off, SMB version one on any new servers. Hey, you can't have old versions of TLS running. You need to upgrade and disable those and only use the more modern versions. And then spread that information, make it part of your policy, and kind of make sure people are following it. Now, occasionally we run into situations where there's not a lot we can do, right? There's no patch available. It's an end of life system, but it's required for your operations. There's definitely some industries out there, manufacturing. I'm looking at you, OT stuff. I'm looking at you, where the cost to upgrade is excessive, and there's no better version currently, maybe. Or maybe the business is so ingrained in a custom application that just doesn't run on a modern solution that you're just stuck with old infrastructure. It sucks, but it happens. So we need to be able to acknowledge that those are potential situations. And that's not great, but it is okay for a business to accept that level of risk. Now, in those situations, you want to look for what are called compensating controls, right? If you can't get rid of the system and there's no patch available and there's no way you can configure it a little bit better to fix the issue, you can look at adding additional protections, right? Maybe it's adding additional monitoring. That way, if it does get compromised, you're aware faster. Maybe it's adding additional tooling that does like PAM functionality or some type of escalation of privilege management or some better alerting tool or some other kind of like isolation tool that only allows processes to run. There's a lot of new cool tools out there that are made for isolating processes, protecting privilege escalation, and really just locking core functions down on systems. It could be moving it to a segregated network and really locking down that firewall to only allow very explicit traffic from specific locations. Um, Implementing things like jump boxes to access it so you don't really risk people logging on there. Like there's a whole world of things you can do to sort of add these compensating controls to situations that are non-ideal. So don't freak out. Don't take a stance that you have to take something offline. The unfortunate reality of information security and IT is that the business still needs to make money. So if you demand a change that makes it so the business can't function, you're almost always going to lose because you don't have to exist if there is no business. And if they make a change that negatively impacts business, that's bad news for everybody, right? So push for patching, push for good security, push for good, correct implementation and upgrades. But understand that there is going to be a point in time where you have to just kind of give in a little and say, okay, we're going to implement some compensating controls. Be willing to bring solutions to the table, not just anger and demands. Now, whichever of these paths you take, make sure you're validating your fixes. We hear it all the time. Yep, this is taken care of. It's been patched. And the next time we run the scan, we see the same thing. And it's, oh, yeah, I meant to change this other registry key. Or, oh, right, we forgot to actually link this group policy. So it didn't execute across everything. Or, oh, we missed some of these servers. Sorry. You have to do validation. You have to make sure that once people have said that the work is done, you scan the environment again and you validate that those things are all resolved. Or in the case of compensating controls, you need to make sure that those controls actually work. They're documented and they're tested regularly because setting up a firewall with really strict rules is great, unless somewhere along the way somebody makes some changes and loosens that grip and that protection, and then you're kind of in a bad situation. So no matter what you do, make sure you're validating your fixes, and ultimately that'll make sure that your environment is secure and safe from these vulnerabilities. All right, so that's how you deal with some vulnerabilities, or some of your options anyway. Have a great night, everybody, and happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month.